issues that affected you all those years. So everyone, once again, I'm sorry. Thank you for, bring them on the camera. Thank you for, just coming on board. Hang on, don't let go, stay nearby, and the next video that you will see is Yvette. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, I'm trying to add, come on. And of course, it's not allowing me. It's not even allowing me to go live. Oh, live video. I'm looking everywhere but where I need to look. Hello, everyone. I apologize for the delay. Barbara wouldn't let me come on, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. One clarification, I don't want to misrepresent myself. I am not a doctor. I'm a mental health counselor, master's level. I'm not a doctor. I didn't want anyone to think that I am protruding or portraying myself as a doctor. Not yet. Okay, so let's get started. Today is mental childhood trauma, specifically sexual abuse. First, we're going to start off by defining what a trauma is. And it's basically how we identify trauma is a psychologically distressing event that is outside the range of usual human experience. Whatever is normal to you, trauma is outside of that. Hold on, y'all. No, it's not letting me. Oh, well. So, a trauma is outside that. Trauma often involves a sense of intense fear, terror, or helplessness. Remember that term, helplessness. And that's where we're going to go further. That's going to take us off into another realm. A sense of intense fear, terror, or helplessness. Trauma should not be confused with stress. Stress is an inevitable component of daily life. We get stressed out daily. Trauma is the experience that induces an abnormal, intense, and prolonged stress response. So stress is this, and trauma would be the party clap. That makes sense? So if stress is this, trauma would be the party clap. It's intense, it's prolonged fear, or a sense of helplessness. We're gonna go back to that. Helplessness is a powerful drug. Depending on the degree of trauma, someone can remain in a low level of anxiety, and that's their jump off point. So we're going throughout life. This is us. Something trauma happens and it raises us to this level. And because of if we fail to process it, if we fail to identify what it is, if we fail to adjust, or not necessarily adjust, that's a bad word. We're here, something happens, and it takes us our anxiety to here. And we don't get back to here. What we do is trauma, when something happens, instead of processing it and getting through whatever we are dealing with, we stay there for continuation until we either process it, and this is when, if something happens in our childhood, we go to here. And then we just stay there. So while something may happen, let's just say this is us. 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, we're teenagers. Where someone else that hasn't experienced something is here, and so they have to go to intensity, they have to go to here. You're already here, so as soon as something happens, you're ready to fight. You're ready to fight, flight, or freeze. So I don't want to get ahead of myself, so I'm gonna continue to go. It's depending on the degree of trauma, Someone can remain in a low level of anxiety, and that's their jump off point. That's where they are from that point on. Where others are calm in a situation that places them in a vulnerable position, they may get lost, not able to figure things out, can't put things together. These people can go from frustration to nuclear in a matter of seconds. These people are the people that can be sitting around doing something. And my sister and I laugh about it often because I'm going to tell on us. We laugh about it often because I don't like feeling vulnerable. I don't. So I had a computer, actually the computer that I'm on right now, it wasn't working. So I started beating it. Yes, I'm a therapist and I go through my moments. Don't judge my life. So I just started hitting it. I felt so good in releasing that. But I crashed the hard drive. So when I took it to the get it fixed, I told them that the hard drive crashed. And the guy was like, well, this must have felt really hard because the components in it are messed up. And I'm like, probably did. Don't judge my life. So, but if I were to get ahead of myself, I experienced sexual trauma when I was a teenager. So, I'm almost 50 years old now and just starting to process it, just starting to get to a point where I can identify what issues are my triggers and what issues are what bothers me. I'm just getting to that point now. So fast forward. Types of trauma, types of stress is acute and chronic. Acute is a car accident. Imagine you're driving on the highway and a car suddenly swerves in front of you. Your lane, then it veers, barely missing you. How do you feel? You're scared, you're jittery, you're numb, you're frozen. Now imagine in the same emotional state. Now imagine being in that emotional state and someone asks you for directions to your house. That's how trauma is. It takes us there, and then we are there at that jump off point. I'm identified as that, at that jump off point continuously. So as we're there at that jump off point continuously, when someone asks you for something, that affects your learning, that affects your dexterity, that affects how you walk, how you talk, that affects what aggravates you, that affects everything. So you're continuously here when you should be here. Now, let's just say that now imagine that you are in an emotional state and someone asks you for directions to your house. You're at that trauma level. You're at that acute. Acute is happening one time. Chronic is happening continuously. So you're going to be distracted. You're not going to be able to concentrate. You're going to fumble and you're going to make mistakes. One time event that provokes fight, flight, or freeze. That one time event, the acute trauma, provokes the fight, flight, or freeze. That state that whatever state got you to safety is the state that you're likely to stay in or revisit. For instance, if that trauma happened and you were able to fight your way out of it, then whenever those triggers or anything get you to the point where you're ready to fight, that antagonizes that trauma, that anxiety, you're ready to fight all over again because that got you out of the last one. If you froze, then you're likely to repeat that behavior. If you freeze, you're likely to repeat that behavior. So depending on what state you're in, what state got you out of where you need to be, that's where you're likely to repeat. And unfortunately, my alarm did that the last time we were here. So the state that got you to safety is the state you're likely to reside in. That's not to say that that's where you will reside, but you can reside there. And at times, this is the person that overreacts. Well, when those triggers happen, they jump off to ready to overreact, what we consider overreacting. They don't say anything. Things happen, and they don't say anything. And then all of a sudden, you got a nuclear explosion. You like, where the heck did that come from? This is somebody that's likely, not necessarily always, but is likely had experienced a trauma. Some people are unable to recover from an acute trauma and in a timely way. As a result, they are more likely to develop acute stress disorder or post-traumatic stress. The type of severity and duration of exposure to traumatic stress will influence the course of recovery. The best thing for recovery, or a way to get to recovery, is to get to therapy. Get to somebody that has this experience and can get you through this. It's like going to the doctor. I use this analogy quite often. If you had a cold and you begin to nourish your cold, you begin to doctor it, and it progressed, it got worse and worse. There wouldn't be a short amount of time before you realize that the symptoms that you're possessing are greater than the skill that you have to minimize those symptoms. It's only a matter of time before you realize that. And when you do realize it, that you are outside of your work, outside of your realm, what you do is you go to the doctor, because that's something that's greater than what you can do, that what you can handle. So when it comes to mental health, we continue to try to work on ourselves and take care of ourselves and continue to do what we need to try to get ourselves better. And it's not working. Barbara, I see that you sent me a message, but it's not coming up. Text my phone. Some people are unable to recover from acute trauma in a timely way. As a result, they are more likely to develop acute stress disorder. The situation of complex trauma. I'm gonna skip that. Complex trauma changes in the way that it changes. Complex trauma. My words are getting jumbled up. Changes the way our brain functions. Imagine you're back in that car, and after and then you have an accident. Remember that car that I was talking about earlier? Imagine every single time you got in that car, you had an accident. How would you respond to that? Would you stop driving? Would you avoid places that you normally go? If you always got in an accident by the street light or by the corner store, would you take an alternate route? What if you went around to an alternate route and you still got in a car accident? That affects how our brain begins to develop. And that now becomes a part of us. According to Judith Herman, a mental health counselor / trauma specialist, traumatic events produce profound and lasting changes in our psychological arousal, emotion, cognition, and memory. Traumatic events sever these normally integrated functions from one another. Arousal, emotional, and cognition are constantly mingling together. You guys are probably asking me, what does this have to do with sexual trauma? Let me help. I'm going to get to that. Our arousal, emotions, cognition are continuously mingling together. And we experience a trauma, sexual trauma specifically is what we're talking about. It disrupts those communication. So we begin to interpret danger when there is no danger. We begin to fear people when there's no need to fear people. We even sometimes begin to not acknowledge danger to someone, and there is a possibility that there is danger. So it disrupts that communication. As discussed, the brain's alarm system prepares the body for the response of flight, or freeze. For children who have experienced multiple traumatic events, such as physical abuse, sexual abuse, witnessing domestic violence, this danger alarm goes off too often. And because it goes off too often, the reaction is to say, you know what, forget it. The thinking brain, the part of the brain, gets tired of checking things out for assumed threat and real danger, and this causes the thinking brain to shut down. It just say forget it, and allows the doing brain, our primitive functions, to take over. For instance, if you are in a situation where you're constantly fighting, or should I say, imagine you're sitting in your front room right now, and a lion walks through your front door. Someone opens the door and a lion walks through the door. If that happens, the thinking part of your brain is not going to come into play and say, you need to get up, you need to try to find somewhere to hide. It's not going to do that. Your instincts are going to come in, and the instinct part of you are going to come in. And when that happens, you don't really need to think. You just need to, you need that, the oxygen that was going to your brain, you need it to go to your muscles. So when it does, you need to be able to fight. You need to be able to run. You need to be able to do all those things to protect yourself or to survive. Now, what happens in trauma is we get stuck in those states to fight, fright, or fight, flight, or freeze. And when we stay there, we're always in a constant state of something is about to pop off and I'm gonna be ready. False alarms can be set off when we hear, see, feel things that remind us of previous trauma. For instance, those I just talked about, that the triggers. These reminders are called triggers. The brain has learned to recognize these triggers because in the past they were heard, saw, or felt, and it meant that there was something that was coming behind it, a danger coming behind it. Because these triggers may not seem alarming to others, they don't always seem to make sense. That's when I say that we're about to pop off about something or get involved in something, and there's no need to. Whatever the trigger is to set the alarm off, the body fuels itself to prepare to deal with the danger. When the danger is real, this response is helpful. If a lion walks through our front door, it's helpful to be able to jump up and run, or to protect yourself, or to grab something, or to fight. When the body prepares, but there isn't any danger, the person is left with pent-up energy with no outlet. That usually settles in our shoulders, our back, and in our lower back. Across our shoulders, our head, and our lower back. Sometimes children can feel angry, upset, they want to fight, and they want to, when their body perceives dangers. Often children do not understand, but children do not understand why they are acting this way. Adults that are not in tune with the kids or don't know, that's a bad word, the adults don't know the children, don't understand why they're acting that way. Triggers varies from person to person and are unique to each person's experience. When we fail to process our surroundings, it changes our outlook on life. A physical event physically changes us. A physical event physically changes us. As the individual begins to feel threatened, the initial stage of complex total body response begins. The brain orchestrates, direct, and control this response. If the individual feels more threatened, the brain amps up. The cognitive and emotional behavior functioning of the individual will reflect the shift along the arousal continuum. During the traumatic event, all aspects of functioning in the individual change. Feeling, thinking, and behavior all change. Someone being assaulted doesn't spend a lot of time thinking about future, making abstract decisions, or only thing they're thinking about is their survival. Someone being assaulted does not think about what they're going to eat tomorrow. They're trying to figure out a way to get out of where they are. If they don't process that, they stay at that continuum for the rest of their lives. And some people do. And the natural progression, the natural order of progression is whatever state something is in is to take it to the highest state. It's disarray, should I say. The natural order progression is whatever state of something is for disarray. So if that is the case, if you're supposed to be here and you're here, if you don't go to talk to somebody, talk to your girlfriends, talk to someone, you continuously go up until you're up here and you're the person that you jump at everything. People bother you, everything aggravates you. And that's a continuum that you're going to continue to go to. And that usually happens until your heart, your liver, your lungs, your kidneys say, you know what, I'm out. I can't continue to live at this state anymore. The first few days and weeks after a traumatic event, the symptoms, sometimes you can begin to re-experience them. There's usually an attempt to forget it or an attempt to regurgitate it continuously, regurgitate it in your mind. The more prolonged the trauma, the more difficult the symptoms during. The more prolonged the trauma, the more symptoms that will occur. Now, let me talk about something real quick. I'm actually about 10 minutes left on this video, but my time says I'm up. But Barbara, let me know if that's not okay to take another 10 minutes. I want to talk about now secondary trauma. Secondary trauma is when you are a parent, a sister, a cousin, or a family member, a teacher, someone that listens, that are come in contact with children that experience trauma. In these situations, it's called secondary trauma stress. The risks are for secondary traumatic stress is the same as that for someone actually experiencing it. Because of empathy, we take on that of whoever is telling us something. For instance, if your mom walked in and say, I was at the store and someone walked in and slapped me, how long do you think it will take you to get upset like that? Because you've taken on that trauma, you've taken on that experience, and you're going to make it right. That being the case, being in an environment where children are exposed to different things in life, if we don't take care of ourselves, we can experience secondary traumatic stress, and it's the same as that of someone else experiencing it. Secondary traumatic stress has been expanded in the recent years to pediatricians, psychologists, psychiatrists, family lawyers, adult mental health professionals, child protective services, prison guards, juvenile probation officers, foster parents, and teachers. The reason that there's an increased risk in caregivers is because of empathy, insufficient recovery time, unresolved personal trauma. Children are the most vulnerable members of our society. Isolation and systematic fragmentation, and lack of systemic resources. Empathy. Anytime somebody tell you something, you're likely to take on that. For instance, if I go back to your mom walks in and says somebody slapped her at the grocery store, you're going to take on that. You're going to try to write that. You're going to feel angry. You're going to feel upset. You're going to feel you got to get that person. And if you don't take on that, then it's likely that it might be said that, you know what I'm saying, that you're cold-hearted, but we have to protect ourselves as caregivers to be empathetic, but also take care of ourselves. Insufficient recovery times. And when you come in contact with this, you gotta be able to recover from it. If you have if you have unresolved personal trauma and you come in contact with a child or someone that has experienced this trauma, it can trigger unresolved issues that you have. I personally believe there is a reason that teachers are given a 3-month break every year. You work for 9 months and then you're out for 3 months. Some teachers don't take that time to recover. So they come back, and I see it on my timeline because I see teachers often, and they'll state, I can't believe we're back at school again, or here we go again, or another year of this, and and that when the first thing that I think of when I see a teacher that responds like that is they didn't take that 3 months off during the summer to recover. They either got another job, and that's not a bad thing because sometimes you got to pay bills. But the time that you're off, you got to recover. You got to take care of yourself. Healing. Talking with and supporting each other has been a major step in the healing process. If you can't get to a therapist, you can get to your coworker. Healing, self-care. It is mandatory that you take the time out for yourself, acknowledge what you're feeling, process your emotions, exercise. Stress settles in the shoulders, head, and back, which orchestrates the major body functioning. If your head, your shoulders, and back, all of those going to affect your body functioning. When there is tension, exercise. Breathe. I like to call it the triple nickel breathing. I got about 7 more minutes. Triple nickel breathing is breathe in for 5, hold for 5, and let go for 5. What that does is that gives your brain oxygen. If you go back to what I was saying earlier, during the primitive state, during a trauma, the body deprives the brain of oxygen and it sends it to the fight, flight, or freeze mechanism, whichever one you decide, whichever one you use, and gets you out of that situation. Because of that, when we're in a heightened arousal state, we're not breathing. Either we are, and we begin to go back to the primitive state and we start reacting. And because we start reacting, we're not thinking. So if I can get you to get upset, if I can get you to get outside, I call it outside of yourself. I can get you to do anything I need you to do, or to respond in a way that now I can say this is okay. This, the reason that I did this was because they were upset, or they were out of character, or they were fighting, or whatever. But when you're in a heightened arousal state, the first thing that you got to do is start breathing. Get some oxygen to that brain. Allow yourself to start taking in. Read a book unrelated to your work. Go to a museum. Find some joy in something. Spend time with friends. I keep saying that every single one that I've talked about. Spend time with friends. Spend time with people. You cannot do this alone. You cannot. Actually, a trigger to worsen the effects of a trauma is to be by yourself. I heard a saying when I was in grad school. It says the worst place to go alone is in your own head. Eat right, exercise regularly, get enough sleep, practice relaxation techniques, and spend time with friends. I don't want to overstep my boundaries, so I'm going to leave the last 5 minutes. I was a bit hyper myself. I wasn't breathing. When we first started, I was a little frustrated because the thing wouldn't get started. But if you have any questions regarding trauma or individual trauma, start asking those now. I'm going to leave it open. I got about 3 cameras going here, and I'm trying to stay focused on what's actually happening. If I were to reiterate what I was saying, I'm going to go back to the beginning. Trauma is a psychological, involves a sense of intense fear, terror, and helplessness. It is not stress. If stress was a clap, trauma would be the party clap. Trauma should not be construed, and it's a sense of helplessness. Helplessness is a powerful, powerful drug. I hear a click, but let me see. If a child has dealt with sexual abuse, parents can miss it if they don't take the time to listen. Watch the signs. I like to ask kids, if you ask a kid that goes spend night with someone, how was your trip? They're likely to say good. But I found that if you ask, what was the best part about your trip? What was the worst part about your trip? They're more likely to tell you things that they would not say if you just asked them, how was your trip? And then say, what didn't you like about it? And ask them questions that allow them to tell you how they're feeling. Because a lot of times kids can't tell you or won't tell you what's happening, but they'll tell you how they feel. I don't like such and such because I don't like how I feel when I'm around them. Pay attention to that. Unresolved personal trauma is when you've dealt with something yourself personally, and you, I like to say, keep packing it down like brown sugar in a cup. And when you initially turn that upside down, it's not coming out. But you beat on it, it still sometimes may not come out. But when you stick a spoon in and start scraping around the inside of the cup, then it may drop off. Unresolved personal trauma. Dad, I can't talk to you right now. Unresolved personal trauma is when you've gone through something, you've dealt with something, but you have not, and then somebody else had you come in contact with someone else and they experience something that triggers your own something that you've personally dealt with, and you haven't, that trigger experience triggers something in and instead of being there to help them, you begin to go in your own head. You begin to deal with what's going on in your life. How do you help somebody? Help someone who don't want to share a traumatic experience, then don't make them. You cannot force someone to go into a tunnel that they're refusing to go into. If they don't want to go in there, then don't force them in there. But there is something powerful about being available for somebody in case they want to go into that tunnel. I have a very dear friend of mine that says, that told me when I first met him, he said, we were talking about me going, sometimes I can go off and into my own head, and sometimes it feels like dark spaces. And he said, if you go in there, I'll go with you, or I'll come get you. There is nothing more powerful than that, than hearing those words, that if someone goes in there, if you go in there, I'll go with you, or I'll come get you. So you can't force somebody you can't help somebody that don't want to be helped. You can't force somebody to talk about something that they don't want to talk about, but you can be available if they ever do. And you can't keep saying, if you need to talk to somebody, come talk to me. Just being there. I can hear your words by your presence more than I can hear your words by you telling me. I can, if you need to talk to somebody, I'll be there. Does that make sense, Geraldine? I hope so. Any other questions? Journaling. Yes, Barbara, I journal quite often. This is what I say. Actually, that was one of my points. I say that things that happen to us are like letters, and they're in our head. And after so long, it just starts taking up space. You ever get so bombarded with things going on in life that you can't think straight? It's time to empty that head. It's time to get that stuff out. And by getting out, it's journaling. Journaling helps. It allows you to tell exactly how you feel. It allows you to get everything out your head, and it allows you to get to a point where you can see. That's almost like oxygen for the brain that I was speaking of earlier. It allows you to get to the point where you can see things clearly, where you start breathing and you like, you know what? Now this is better. Journaling is an awesome task or something. I don't know what word I'm looking for, but it's awesome. It helps a lot. And then, you know, what's really therapeutic is if something has happened in your life, journal it, write it down, and then burn it. I'm going to tell you this before I get off. I had something going on in my life, and I kept regurgitating, reliving it over and over and over. And I read this somewhere and I journaled it. I wrote it down. I wrote down every detail of it, everything that happened, how I felt, everything that was going on. And then I balled it up and then I burned it. It took me 7 times, don't look at my nails, 7 times to continue to light that fire to that piece of paper before it burned. Now, I look at that as spiritually, and I look at that as symbolically. That thing had been bothering me my entire life, and I could not shake it. I could not let it go. But even when I got it all out of my head and got all my emotions down, my anger, my frustration, all the people that I felt had let me down, all the people that I felt weren't there for me, when I got it down and then I balled it up, paper burns. That thing, I had to keep lighting that thing over and over because it would burn a little bit, then it would go out. There was no wind blowing because I was sitting in my front room on the floor. There was no AC on or nothing. I just kept burning it, kept setting it on fire, and it finally burned. When it finally burned, I cannot tell you how much better I felt knowing that that issue was gone. And I'm not going to say that I'd never dealt with that issue again, but to that degree, how much it had paralyzed my life, I haven't seen that it manifest to that level since then. Any other questions? No? All right, so that's what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go live again. I was a little flustered at first, and I babbled over the first part of this presentation, but I'm gonna go live again. So if you missed the first part on Better Decisions, Better Health, I'm gonna do it over. So stay tuned. Barbara, if you don't have any questions, I'm gonna sign off now. I love you guys, and I will meet you in the other group, Barbara. Y'all take care. Bring who on camera, Isaac? Bring them on camera. What are you talking about? I'm going to be back in a second.